You've been watching decentralized finance for a while now. Seen some people make a fortune, others lose everything. You want to get involved now, but the complexity is insane. The risk, unbearable. Let's face it, you have no time to specialize in decentralized apps, and no money to lose either. Well, there is an easy way to earn returns from DeFi. A solution with no trading involved, no hassle. A place where you're always in control. Just deposit funds and watch your savings grow. We're talking about an app. We're talking about the Yield app. DeFi banking in your pocket.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Fridays with Yield App. I am Rebecca Jones, Head of Communications at Yield App. Apologies for our late start. As ever, there were technical issues for which we are becoming famous. But today we have a very, very exciting chat all about risk, which doesn't seem that exciting, but bear with us. It is. It's really exciting. And to show us just how exciting it is, we have Credmark, an up-and-coming, if not already up, DeFi risk analysis platform, and Steady State Finance, definitely an up-and-coming DeFi risk platform. We have Jonathan Libby of Steady State, and we have Neil Zumwalt and Momin Ahmed, founders of Credmark. Hi guys, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us. And for everyone that's not aware, these guys are in the US, so they're being absolute heroes right now, and they're joining us at the crack of dawn. So we've got them bright and early, and hopefully we'll make sure that we get as much as we can out of them for 6 a.m. So guys, do you want to just introduce yourselves, tell us what your projects are about, maybe a bit about yourself? Let's start with Credmark.
Okay, hi there. I'm Neil Zumwalt. I'm one of the founders of Credmark.
And I'm Momin Ahmed, also a founder. Credmark is a decentralized risk modeling platform. I will save you all the boring details, but essentially we are trying to leverage the power of the DeFi community to build a robust, high integrity risk modeling platform for all of DeFi to leverage to avoid or to calculate risk and avoid massive losses.
Awesome. And you guys know me. John Libby from Steady State. Love the Yield community. I apologize. It looks like I just woke up. I literally just woke up. Yeah, it's good to be on board and keep talking about the issues and catching up with the community and giving them updates if they want to what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I think we'd be really excited. So, I mean, for those of you that don't know, that are watching, we are actually partnered both with Steady State and Credmark, and we haven't had an update from Steady State for a while. So, John, we'll go into that later. But what I'd love to talk about really is kind of the news, because this has been a crazy week for risk in the DeFi space. I mean, if ever we needed to talk about why we need to manage risk in the DeFi space, it's probably been this week. Neil, do you want to start off by kind of explaining, what's happened at Cream? Because as we were speaking earlier, that really feeds into the research and analysis that you guys are doing.
I would absolutely love to. So we recently just published some analysis at Credmark of the crypto collateralized lending protocols. Right, fully automated collateralized lending protocols. The big two in that space are generally regarded as Compound and Aave. And so most everybody's familiar with Compound and Aave. Cream operated in a very, very similar way. It was a collateralized lending platform. It just wasn't quite as big as those two, so it wasn't used quite as frequently in most people's analysis. So what we discovered is when we would go to money managers and hedge funds and stuff and talk about what is the risk-free rate of DeFi, people would often say it's stablecoins on Aave, right? That's regarded as the risk-free rate of DeFi. And so when we were doing our analysis, we were like, okay, let's actually stress test Aave using a few different market scenarios, using a few different liquidity scenarios, and just sort of like sentiment that could be surrounding the industry. And what we found is that there's, while Aave does do some risk, it does pretty good risk mitigation work. When people say, oh, it's impossible for Aave to become under collateralized, we found out that that's not necessarily true. And then people might be saying, well, how would that happen? And what we found is that there are market scenarios that move fast enough to make that happen. But one of those market scenarios is potentially an exploit. So when the Cream Finance hack happened, what that did was, in order for someone to borrow funds on a collateralized lender, you need to put up collateral. So what the exploiter did, the hacker did, is they essentially borrowed from a different platform. They borrowed a whole bunch of cash that they used to get a whole bunch of a different asset that they put in as collateral. Mm-hmm. Then what they did is they artificially made it look like that collateral was worth way, way, way more money than it actually was worth, right? So they said, oh, here's a bunch of YUSDC, and now I'm going to go over here and pull some of these levers, and now YUSDC, according to Cream, your YUSD is worth way, way, way more than what it was worth.
But how does that work for anyone that's not familiar with this? How can you put USDT or USDT, I think in this case, or C? Sorry, it was which one?
It was YUSD, just to be specific.
Okay, YUSD, to be specific. Yeah. USDT doesn't need any more bad press. YUSD goes into Cream, and then this guy or girl or person, perhaps, them.
Shadowy supercoder.
Yeah, turns it into, or makes Cream think it's worth more. Can you just break that down, how that works?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we look for in Credmark is there a place at which a vault or an asset, a token or something is broadcasting its own value. So that's one of the big things that we look for in when we're doing analysis. Excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. I'm not gonna sneeze.
That's the worst. That's the worst thing when you don't sneeze. I feel for you. I'm sorry. One of the things that we look for is if I as a smart contract, if I as code that is running on a blockchain am saying, hey, world, this is how much I'm worth, and it's based on whatever state I'm in, then people can change that state, and I'm going to tell the world this is what I'm worth, right? So since some of these assets are saying have a way to actually broadcast that information, that's one of the things that we look for by saying that's an easy spot for people to manipulate. Okay.
Cream had actually taken an asset that has that feature, and usually it's a feature, right? Because it makes it very easy to know how much is this vault worth. Cream had included an asset that had that feature on it in their portfolio, and it actually bubbled the risk of that asset being exploited to all the other assets that were on Cream Finance. And there was 32 or something.
How though?
That got hacked. Because essentially, this hacker, they had as much access to borrow money of all these other assets. They had as much access as this first thing is worth. So if I put in collateral, if I were to say, here, you can have this pen as collateral, you'd be like, oh, that pen isn't worth anything. You can't borrow very much against that pen. If I gave you this pen and then manipulated it so that it would tell you that it was worth $1 billion, or in this case, I think $2 billion, right? Wow. $2 billion. You'd be like, yeah, you can borrow whatever you want against it. And then all that the hacker needed to do was to borrow everything that was left in Cream. It essentially borrowed everything that was just sitting around not doing anything, and never paid back the loan. So
wow.
There you go.
And the mechanism that allows all this is a flash loan, which essentially allows you to borrow. I think it was $2 billion worth.
I want to say it's $2 billion.
$2 billion worth uncollateralized loan that allowed you to shift the price of a yearn. Was it a yearn?
Yeah, it was YUSD Vault. Yes.
That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, flash loans, for people that don't know, these, and when I try to explain these as well to people that aren't involved in this space, it's just kind of mind blowing. It's a loan that you take out, and just correct me if I'm wrong here, guys. You take out and you repay at the same time. So effectively, it's no risk to the lender because it's all being done in one block. And so because there's no risk to the lender, you can just take out as much as you want.
Yep. And so that's absolutely
There's
correct.
also no risk to the borrower too.
Well, yeah, because essentially the transaction is going to fail if you haven't paid back the loan by the end of the transaction. But it does allow you to do whatever sort of engineering in the middle with essentially, in this case, it was like inflate the price of this asset by a lot so that this over here thinks something different than is actually going on, then borrow a whole bunch, deflate the asset, and pay it back. And so that's essentially how the hack worked.
Yeah, it's pretty tricksy and wild stuff. So like on your side, you are looking for vulnerabilities in something like Cream or Aave or whatever, a really large kind of lending platform for perhaps borrowing as well, large DeFi platform, and kind of how to sort of assess that risk. And then on your side, John, what is Steady State then doing in the kind of aftermath of such an event?
Yeah, so we do have to understand the risk. We have to understand risk, just like Credmark has to understand risk, but Credmark understands way more than we do. We have to understand like very actuarial risk. So what we come in is not just figuring out the likeliness of a hack happening. We come in after the fact. So we're post a catastrophe or post an event happening. And if someone's insured, then we try to cover them. So Credmark helps understand what's going to lead up to a catastrophe event happening, and if they're covered by us, then we choose to insure them after the catastrophe. And that's kind of the big difference between Steady State and Credmark is like they're like a Moody's and we're like an AIG, or they weigh the risk and we assess the damage.
But you'd be, I guess, sort of listening to the kind of research and analysis that Credmark and others are putting out in order for you to kind of, as a side on how to insure somebody that comes onto your platform, right?
Exactly. So take like something. So this is one example, maybe before we go into like understanding risk in DeFi, is something you can like work with like a group like Credmark for. They're talking about risk-free rate of return. So, and it comes to like in portfolios for insurers, they usually have a massive bond portfolio full of very low risk to risk-free investments. So I think, when you think about risk-free rate, there's going to be we have to find, and that's called float returns. The float returns that you can get while you're waiting for a non-payout. So when it comes to finding the risk-free rate of return, we can do our own research and figure that all out, or we can just call Credmark and be like, hey, you guys have research on risk-free rate of return. And if they have it and they've already done their research and their due diligence, which is what their goal is, then we can just apply that, right? And so like it's things like that where their multifaceted use is way larger than ours, and it kind of meets their and us using them as a resource meets both of our goals, where we're trying to use a reliable source, and it's their goal for them to be a reliable source and to be a standard. And so it actually kind of works for both parties quite well to keep working together.
Okay. And then how are you insuring people? Because out there in like, the AIG and the Aons and the big insurers, that's basically people coming along and buying insurance policies, and it goes into a collective pool, and then, you can draw on that pool if something happens. How does it work with Steady State?
So the collective pool model, which is how normal insurance works, where you put a bunch of money together to insure an event, and then people can get policies out of that event. It's not really a feasible model. I think, in my opinion, the current status of how DeFi insurance works. The reason why is, say, if you get a policy covering flash on attacks or bugs or exploits, okay, so then what that would look like, okay, is anyone can maybe get a policy there if it's decentralized, or if you try to prove people, it's hard to figure out who's going to want a policy like that. What I'm finding is how you want to build insurance is you look at a specific protocol or a specific business, and you establish the risks the business wants insurance with, and you got to almost insure that business for those specified risks. And you almost got to and if you want to convince people to put collateral into a pool, if you build a pool where anyone can get insurance risk, the pay side to the protocol is very high if retailers are providing capital, and the downside risk potential is extreme. Take the Cream hack. I think it was around $70 million total was stolen, and at least that was the first analysis. I think maybe it was more,
What's the total now?
It was 130 on that.
130. Yeah, I think the first guess was like 70 million or 68 million, and it went up to 130 or something. It's crazy. Ouch. But like, if you think about like, there was a Nexus Mutual pool for retailers trying to insure Curve. it was only $16.8 million, and it was for retailers exposed to Curve. Retailers should not keep up the difference between like catastrophe hacks on the event. So what we're looking to do is like we insure an individual business, and then what we do is because we know the user would have lost 100% of their assets if they put money on covering the business, we're going to take all the assets and put them into control weighted pools where if I put money here to cover this downside risk, okay, on this individual protocol, my downside is no longer potentially 100%, but we limit the amount of downside potential. So say if it's only 3, 4, 5%, then we can actually really control that, or 1% ideally, or less than 1%. And so what this kind of creates is a model where if I'm a retailer provide capital, let's say, I understand it's high risk covering a business. So say if a business is willing to pay a 20% premium to cover their downside risk, I receive a 20% premium. By taking all these pools, individual pools, and put them into one weighted pool, that with 1% exposure, 100 protocols, okay, my downside event is only 1% expected loss on the highest level, with my upside being maybe a 20% in a variable assets of like 20 naturally accumulating protocols. And what we're looking to do also is before you deposit into this event, this is what we've been really in the deep work on the CTO right now is building an AMM, where when I deposit my dollars in here, I receive, a token representing my dollar I can use in our ecosystem.
And an AMM is an automated market maker, just for anybody who's not keeping up with all of the terms.
So what this automated market maker will do naturally is if I put $100 in here, okay, I can use $100 in this ecosystem right now, separately only in this ecosystem to cover the downside risk, and it's accepted currencies in this ecosystem. And those currencies are put into risk-free rate investments, let's say at 6-7%. And what this basically creates is now on the bottom line principle of whatever I inject, if it's 1% exposure, if I'm in a pool, 7 events, have to file for insurance for me to even lose my principal, okay? And because this will naturally filter in, like say, over an annual period and cause you from losing any money. And then on the upside, I'm still getting 20%. And so the goal about a retailer is knowing that if you want a retailer to believe in insurance, you get to create a product that's like really retailer friendly to bring money. And we're almost building a product where you have to hit a feasible amount of payouts before you experience a net loss. And it's actually a very effective model if you actually look at the amount of payout mechanisms on a per annual basis per hacks. And say if you have a protocol with a top 100 DeFi index with 1% exposure on 100 protocols, then like what you're going to see is the likeliness if you ever experience a loss is going to be so significantly low, especially with this AMM constantly like refilling if a payout does happen if you wanted to. So like if you put 100 in, you have to get 6 protocols on the top 100 DeFi index filed for insurance, which is very low. I'm going to profit, and then on my principal, and then I'm still going to get a 20-30% and 100 tokens naturally accumulating. And we have a model with the token side as well for an auto staking model, but to grow your yield. But like what it creates is a model for the retailer that like it makes insurance almost really freaking safe to invest into.
Well, you'd kind of want insurance to be safe. I mean, ideally. I mean, and what I'd love to kind of tease out, you've given us a lot of really interesting information there. But what definitely stands out is at the moment, you're building this, right? And Credmark, you guys are analyzing this risk because those guys out there in traditional finance won't or just aren't. Right. So maybe let's start with you guys. Like, how are you kind of filling this need, and like what challenges do you face trying to do this in a space that is completely devoid of any traditional finance safety nets?
That was to Credmark?
Yeah, Credmark, to you guys. Yeah, please.
What challenges do we face? Well, our risk team comes predominantly from TradFi.
Great. Okay.
So what the trick for me is teasing out the creativity for how to create these sort of like crypto analogs to TradFi, factors, because a lot of it's the same, right? Like we know how collateralized lending works in the traditional financial world. We know how several of these like financial primitives exist. So it's taking that traditional research and saying, okay, now we're in crypto, right? Now we know that the market risk is just going to be insane, right? It's just going to be insane. Plus anything you might consider cash is a pegged stablecoin, and any of those could go to zero, so your cash could go to zero a lot more easily. Your market risk is always really high. So the trick with the trick in crypto is, okay, we know that your risk tolerance just has to be higher to get in. But what are the situations that we can apply like crypto specialized risk analysis? And that mostly has to do with if I have some asset and it gets wrapped up in a protocol. Generally what I'll get a token back that represents my stake in that protocol. So one of the very first questions we asked is, what can I always get back my original asset, right? So then what we have is the liquidity risk of that protocol. And then the next question is, okay, everything's code, right? So what's built on top of that protocol? So the way things work in DeFi is one protocol will be like the base protocol where you can get some yield. Then,
could you give us an example?
So people use Aave a lot, but Aave is even built on top of these assets. And so in a similar way where Cream was built on top of these assets, and one of these assets had a vulnerability, and that bubbled up to Cream. Now anything that was built on top of Cream, where it would say, oh, come use our app and we'll take this cash, invest it to get yield, and then give you something else, and then we mix it around. So like those are generally called yield aggregators.
Got it,
so if there's any yield aggregators on top of that are using that one below it, well, then what we have is we have to look at the inheritance to say, here's one vulnerability in one of the 32 assets under Cream, and maybe this yield aggregator uses Cream and Aave and Compound, and so there's this one vulnerability can essentially bubble up. So if you're using this top one, then the question is, what does it look like? What is the relationship between all the pieces inside of it? So if Cream goes to zero, does the whole thing go to zero? Or if Cream goes to zero, just divide your portfolio in half, in terms of value. So like different aggregators work in very, very, very different ways. And so as we're looking at this, at the risks that are involved, it's sort of like once we figure out the risk down at the bottom, then it's just a matter of bubbling that all the way up the stack. And that just takes research, and these DeFi protocols are coming out every single day, and they're all structured in fun, new, hard to analyze ways. So we really want to employ our community to help us kind of stay up to date with those types of things. And these contracts get updated. They add new tokens every day that they support. And so like all of that stuff needs to be kept a watchful eye. And some of it scales really nicely, and some of it doesn't scale very well.
Okay. So you've got your community feeding in and helping you somehow? How does that work?
Yeah. So if you're a community member in Credmark, the way that sort of like the final version of our protocol is going to be one that you can go in and you can investigate all the different things, all the different assets we support, all the different protocols we're looking at, all the different pools, and you can say, hey, this one's missing. You can build your own. Other people can use it, and you will get rewarded for building those models. So that's the decentralized kind of piece of this thing. But I think even before we get to that fully composable platform, what we're doing is we're really relying on our community to help us stay up to date with how these even just kind of the marketing side of these DeFi protocols to say, what are they built on, and what, help us stay up to date on these types of things. So we're building sort of a community risk library at the same time.
Many minds make light work. Yeah. John, what does the steady state community look like? How is the steady state community kind of feeding into what you guys are trying to do?
Well, so what we're trying to do currently is we're still working on the tech documents to make sure it's solid while we're coding and developing this to make sure both are coming out and making a lot of sense. For the community, our goal for them is to they're active right now in the smaller aspects that are coming, like what's the name of our token. We actually just recently changed our token name to make sure based on the community vote. And before we released it, which we thought was a good move to make sure they're cool with it. And when we release tech docs, the goal is for them to look at it, whether maybe a simplified version of it that's more retail friendly, and have them look at it and be like, is this a model I like or model I understand, and get their thoughts. Because the average user, okay, in an ecosystem, we need to make sure these retailers are actually using our ecosystem, and that's always got to make sure you're building a product that they want. And so we have two clients in this system. We have the insured, okay, so it's the business, and then we also have the people who are going to provide capital in the retail model or in any kind of model. We have to incentivize capital into the model. So we need both people to look at this model and be like, this makes sense. And so that's kind of what we use our community for, who are developing and building, and be like, do I want to do this?
Bless you, Neil. You finally got that sneeze out. Sorry. Sorry, John.
Yeah. So with our community, that's what they're really active with, is building, is actually right now they're having fun a lot during the community and just talking and hanging out with each other on Telegram. We're pretty active, I think, community for the average Telegram. Yeah. And for now, we get some documents, we get some texts, and we have them look at it, and we try to get their feedback on how we're developing and building this to make sure that they're in, and not just not make sure we're building a product for people rather than just building something and throwing it out there.
Yeah, we've actually had a question on the stream from Powell Kula, who says, when Steady Token, which I guess is the renamed token. So when Steady Token, John?
We're waiting on our legal review, and then we can make an announcement date on our tokenomics. Our tokenomics is we're hoping we can get it all approved. What we're doing is a really fun, unique model we're really loving, and we think it's going to be a great way for people to want to accumulate it to reach certain goals or tier goals. It's actually has some similar to the yield tier 5 model. And I guess I spend some time with you guys. I guess I should take some stuff from it, but like spend enough time with Tim, eventually you just learn.
He'll brainwash you. Yeah, Tim Frost, our CEO.
But so it's really we're hoping to get it out by December, January, ideally. Maybe things change. We're definitely a tech-heavy project, so it makes sense for us to make sure we're building the tech before we token. So We'll see what happens, and we're talking out to make sure it makes sense.
And good tech takes time. So another comment that we've had come in from David Coleman, actually, I think is a really good one. He says, what I'm taking from all of this is it's very complicated, right? And I think that's a really good point, because for the average person, this stuff is just like, so how are you guys like working to protect the kind of person that might get into cryptocurrency, digital assets, that like brain goes to spaghetti listening to this kind of stuff? Credmark, you start.
Okay. This stuff is complex to a point. And I don't think it's as complex as people initially think it is. I've been in this space long enough where I can pretty easily explain to anybody, just normal person out there, what's going on, and they get a sense of, okay, like that makes sense. There's some complicated math for sure, but like conceptually, I don't think it is as complicated as people assume. And I think that sort of like thinking really needs to change, in my opinion. I think if people just didn't come in with this initial sort of pre-baked thought that it's too complicated for me, I think they'd realize that it's like, oh, I actually do get this. So I push back against that, but there are complex points.
And I'm going to take the exact opposite approach in a moment.
Good. We like a brow.
I have found that most people have a tough time with probabilities, right? So with risk, it's all about the probabilities of different things happening. And then it's all about, like, if it does happen, how much money do you lose, right? So if we can boil it down to those kinds of metrics, I think then we can communicate what we're doing a little better. And so the report that we just put out on Aave and Compound is like, if everything goes to zero, right? If it hits the fan, how much money do you have left?
So I guess to amend my point, explaining to someone that there's a chance they could lose their money in one of these things is not that hard. Explaining to them what the probability is and how much to a dollar amount they're going to lose, that part is hard.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Yeah. John, what's your take on trying to make this slightly less complicated?
Well, I think Neil said it really well. when he was like, or a little bit earlier when he was like, there's this thing, and this is attached. These things are attached to this thing, and then these things are attached to this thing. So this thing breaks, boom, 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 and that's like what it is actually. Like all roads lead to Aave, all roads lead to Curve, all roads lead to Compound. So if Curve breaks, it's like, what happens when Curve breaks? And it's like about like. I think a great example for that real quick is Alchemex. Alchemex is, I'm not sure if people have heard of Alchemex, but it's a repaying loan where it's a loan. You actually can get loans, deposit assets on loans, and you actually you can take money out and that loan repays itself for life.
Yeah, I heard about this. It's a really interesting concept because effectively they take the money and they push it in a yearn vault, right? And then the yearn vault basically earns the interest to pay off the loan and, you're gone away, right?
Risk-free.
Exactly. So here's the example. Is it
though? Is it?
No. Here's the curve. Okay. You deposit. Okay. So you have Alchemex. You deposit DAI into Alchemex and you receive their own stable coin, which is based on a 1-to-1 value for the DAI, but they don't actually own the DAI. The DAI is being deposited, okay, in yearn, and they receive the Y DAI, right? And the DAI is actually being put then into Curve and then put into investment strategies from yearn into Curve. And then whatever Curve is using to manipulate the strategies, you're exposed to that too as an underlying value, maybe in the stable coin, like whatever the strategy is. So what you see is like the underlying strategy, the base value of DeFi, then Curve, which in my opinion is the next layer, and then you have yearn, and then you have Alchemex, and then you have stable coin that has some kind of produced value. Oh man. And it's like, and that's what you gotta go ahead.
You're proving my point. This is really complicated. Yeah.
Well, it is, but it's not. It is, but it's not because like I was going over with a retailer today, and I picked a tree, right? I just picked a tree, and I'm like, oh, so if I am that, but I'm in theory like exposed. If that falls apart here, and this is where it breaks, right? I'm like, yeah, so these can't break. So a great example is with these index pools we're trying to build is high yield, really yield friendly assets for and people can get to insure, but like I don't want this to feel like insurance, okay, for the retailer. It can't. And the problem I think with the Nexus Mutual and all these different models is it feels a lot like insurance. And the problem is they're almost always promising. There's a couple key problems, but like for the retailer, first of all, what they're going to ask is on an index pool is where did my money go if something goes missing, right? That's what they're going to be wondering. So what we're trying to build is a filtered model where in any one event payout and all these different insurance protocols, you have a potential to lose all your money. Like for example, as a capital provider in the Cream Finance Act. But with this model we're trying to build it where you have to have an XYZ max at a critical point. Where if it's below this number, you're not going to lose any money. And the goal is, again, actually applying that derivation model where we have to establish some kind of a risk-free rate of return in the industry. So when I deposit money to an AMM, okay, say, the AMM is growing 6% annual, okay, where we take that deposit on Aave, right? And Aave is considered or notional or somewhere, right? Where we think this is bare bone, this is a risk you just have to generally accept in the industry. And say whatever risk that grows at, okay, if I put money in an index pool, okay, in this AMM that gives me $1 I can use in our system, and then this naturally, okay, if the payout happens, maybe I'm at 1% of lost exposure, it keeps just filtering out the money, where if it's paid out here and then this replaces that constantly. So when I pull out end of the year, 5 protocols file for insurance in this pool, which is pretty high actually for a model. And so this is like a pretty black swan-ish event. I'm still net positive. And that's kind of what we're trying to build for a retail-friendly model, where it's just like you have to have a critical loss in payouts, and the amount of payouts you have to create should be a goodbye to DeFi in general. And and then your upside, let's say, on top of that model you're receiving is like a 20-30% in a bunch of tokens. So you're getting massive exposure to DeFi, you're long DeFi, and we're creating a model ideally for the retailer where you're buying a portion in the risk of DeFi, getting a high payout for, and you have a certain coverage up to a certain amount that you won't even see a loss on your principal, which if you think about that, you could 5 insurable events before you even see a loss. It's kind of a crazy thought, right?
Yeah, that's
what we're building.
That's a wild claim. That's a pretty wild claim. Well, listen,
we have the math. We're actually putting the math together to show it, but it all makes sense logically. We're just putting the math together.
Is it up on the board there? Is the math up on the board just there? Is it?
Yeah, actually, I actually put together the model criteria for 3 events. And now we're actually mapping it out. It's actually the conclusions I wanted to come out from this direction on the whiteboard, and I give it to my devs.
Perfect. Okay, so John does his research on his wall. How are you guys? How are you guys doing your research? I mean, you're kind of reaching out to your communities. Let's have a bit of an update on where you are actually, because we're coming up to time. So Credmark, where are you at the moment in your development? What plans, what things are coming up? Tell us.
So we just started what is called our risk library. And so that started with just that Aave compound report. We're going to be adding reports and then sort of just like the generalized structure of all the different DeFi protocols that we're looking at. We're starting with like a list of about 25 different DeFi protocols. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, how does the Legos work? You know, is this built on top of this, on top of this, on top of this? If we're focusing on that one, we'll just show you what the tree underneath looks like. So we just released our risk library. That's about to start growing, and we're working on our data platform. And so when we came up with these kind of numbers for what the liquidity looks like in these various protocols, we need to operationalize that and show you on a historical graph, okay, is this stuff becoming more risky or less risky over time? So we will be launching that platform. We're going to have an MVP out probably I'm hoping this month. I've got my fingers crossed. I just saw the first working prototype of it on Wednesday.
Exciting.
It's very exciting. And then that comes with a native token staking for Credmark token and authorization for the data platform. So hopefully that comes out later this month, and then it'll just be building on that to make it fully featured over the next 3 to 6 months after that.
Okay, so one to watch. Everybody watch out. John, let's have a little steady state update. In fact, we do have another question asking what does steady state actually look like to me as a yield user. So perhaps you can address that in your update.
So how it looks like to you is totally up to the business. What we're trying to build is a model, okay, where the protocol is getting insurance, and they can offer the community in any way they feel like it's best to offer them. And then for you, okay, so ideally for you, the user of Yield app, steady state is something you don't even interact with. And people want to interact with steady state, be part of a model, couldn't be part of it there. But you won't even have to see it, which is kind of what we're trying to build as a business insurance solution. And then the people want to be a part of the steady state community are then the business insurance contributors. And then on top of that, we want to build a secondary insurance model, but we can go through that. And but like for you as a user, all you have to know is that like if Yield app gets insurance, there is insurance provided to Yield app, and they offer any way they best see fit. And that's kind of what we're trying to build. It's really simple for the end user, and the end user is always going to be the one who cares about whether or not a unit gets insured. And so that's what it looks like for steady Yield app is say Yield app is wants to keep growing this fund of insurance that we're building for them. And so they can say, like, you can sacrifice a portion of your yield, and you're going to get insured XYZ amount, like an FDIC, and they'll build it out however they want, But ideally, although we're going to be building an insurance model, and Yield interacts with us, you don't have to interact with us to get your insurance.
Exciting. And yeah, in fact, for those that aren't aware, the current state of play in DeFi insurance is that you kind of have to insure yourself. So you have to go to Nexus Mutual, which is what John mentioned, and kind of take out a policy of your own against your platform. And kind of what Steady State is working towards is switching that. So actually, it's not your job as the individual user, and it's actually the platform's job to insure. So that will be a really, really great transition, I think, for the industry. But listen, we are at time. So how I would love you guys to wrap up is before you are fully fledged and you are dominating the risk landscape in DeFi and keeping everybody safe like superheroes with your money Legos and trees, how can people avoid getting drawn in to a hack or an exploit? Is there any basic principles people can employ? John, let's start with Credmark, and then John, give us your view.
I feel we can start with John. John is like at the edge of the seat. I really want to know what he's talking about.
All right,
so there was a hack like 3 days ago. Anubis DAO. Had anyone heard of Anubis DAO? No. Anubis DAO was literally a fork or a copy and paste code of Olympus DAO. And what they basically did is we have this tendency as a community to do no due diligence, to ape into something and and just not think about any risk at all. Great example: Doge versus Shiba. Everyone's like, "Wow, another dog coin? Cool. Oh, Floki? Oh my God, I'm in on this now." Like they don't think. Okay, like we just see gains and we want to see gains. So all people see with Olympus DAO is 6,000 APY, and a token that started as $1 and is now worth over $1,000, which is insane, right? And so what happened with there's someone literally copied and posted the Anubis DAO, and basically after people ate in like $30 million in a day. After 3 days of launch, like the person took all the money and left, and they're like, "Wait a second, someone can actually just take money." And when they wouldn't do anything to assess the risk, it was run by one person, one wallet on a centralized asset. That when you deposit, they're promising to develop and mint a fake coin that's all going to one person's personal wallet, and everyone's dumping money into this person's personal wallet. He just takes it, destroys the website, and leaves. The thing about crypto and DeFi is we don't do due diligence. It's simple due diligence, which saves us so many problems, but all we want to see are gains and returns. I hear so many stories of people losing $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 making dumb investments in meme coins rather than actually buying the tech and getting involved. And
right. Don't be greedy. Don't be greedy and do your own research. Neil, I think you've got something to add to that.
This is a little bit of a misnomer because I'm talking to Yield App, but I like to say in DeFi protocols, if you can't tell where the yield is coming from, you are the yield.
Yep.
And so think about, what does this actually do? And if the answer is nothing, then there you go.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So some top.
The answer is nothing. So
some top tips. And in fact, if anybody does want to know how we generate our yield, delve into our Q3 report. We've got a whole big expanded portfolio section. And in our Q4 report, we're going to have Credmark go over us with a fine tooth comb and tell you what is up. So yeah, we're opening the doors wide and letting these guys in to run amok amongst our books. So I can't wait to see the result of that.
Love it.
All right, guys, it's been awesome to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. I have been, still am, Rebecca Jones, Head of Communications at Yield App. I've been joined by John Libby. Are you doing it John or Jonathan these days? Is it John?
John Libby, I guess, is better for
Libby is what we're going with. Okay. Founder of Steady State Finance. Where can people find you, John, and Steady State?
Steadystate.finance. John SST is my Twitter, and you can always find us in the Steady State Telegram.
Perfect. And I've had Neil Zumwald. I think I pronounced that correctly. Hooray! And Momin Ahmed, founders of Credmark. Where can people find you and Credmark?
So I'm on Twitter. I'm at Neil Zum, and Credmark is at Credmark HQ on Twitter.
And the best place to talk to us is on Discord.
That's true, though. Yes, do come talk to us on Discord. That's where we have all of our kind of one-to-one conversations. So,
yeah, and gifts and memes. Perfect.
Top corner somewhere, whatever. It's on there.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So in many places, Discord, Telegram, Twitter, probably the deep, dark photo vaults of the internet, who even knows. But we'll leave you to go and explore that. You can find Yield App across most social media channels except TikTok. Still working on that. Tim is just reluctant to start giving makeup tips. I'm not sure why, but we're still trying to convince him. But yeah, thanks very much for everyone. And please come and join us next time in about 2 weeks when we'll have another Fridays with Yield App. In the meantime, have a great weekend and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Thanks.